美国的大选日很快就要到了，好，那美国公民现在面临的不光是一个民主体系下的一个简单的党派选择的问题，而是站在美国社会和经济政策的一个分岔路口，为美国未来4年的整体价值观展开一个拉锯战。那右手边呢是共和党对于美国更传统的资本主义体系的坚持，那左手边呢是民主党的社会主义体系路线。而美国之所以走到今天这路口呢，是教育体系啊、劳动力市场啊，还有社会契约之间，在过去几十年之内逐渐脱钩的这么一个结果。这样的变化呢，也让更多人做投资选择和信息筛选的时候出现了很多迷茫又恐惧的心理。那这一期呢，我们就从美国大选入手哈，聊一聊上面提到的这个教育啊、劳动啊和社会契约的变化。那这些东西是怎么样导致我们非理性的投资心态的？那而我们应该怎样去看待现在的市场和经济架构，又应该怎么样去平衡各路资讯，在财务上面呢做出一个清晰的规划？这期的嘉宾，我相信有不少人是久闻他大名了。
Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm its founder and your host, Adam Taggart.
Adam Taggart 他创办的 Thoughtful Money 在英文专业财经播客这类别里面呢，质量呢算是天花板级别了。作为顶尖的专家和学者的信息枢纽呢，我这次特意约了他来聊一下，在接触了那么多顶尖头脑的观点之后呢，他本人对于当下的这个美国又有怎样的观察？
Let me preface for your viewers, Joy, that I'm not a political expert. So take that with a grain of salt. So it's interesting, yeah. Right after the assassination attempt, it looked like Trump had a lock on the White House, and of course the polls and the betting markets reflected that too. So it has been a surprise to everybody how strongly the polls have shifted since Joe Biden stepped down and the Democrats have now appointed Kamala Harris. But eventually, she's going to have to really clarify what her policies are, and that's going to determine whether voters really want to pull the Republican or the Democrat lever come November. We saw her start to clarify her economic vision, and she began to get a lot of blowback for it, right? Because a lot of her policies were, some of them came like straight out of the socialists' playbook, price controls, things like that. Very different economic plans from both parties. Trump would be much more of like a Reagan era, laissez-faire. Let's bring taxes way down. Let's implement protective tariffs. Let's try to let sort of natural market forces, power the economy forward. Where Kamala's playbook, at least the bit of we know of it so far, obviously we can look at what's happened so far in the Biden administration because she was part of that. But then look at what she's telling us now going forward. And that sounds like it's going to be much more of a top-down command and control. Let's try to let the government kind of pick winners and losers here. Very, very different. In terms of who I think is going to win the election, I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a bit of a nail biter. Personally, I think right now, depending upon, caveating that a lot could change between now and November. Right now, I think that Donald Trump probably has a better chance of winning. And the reason why I say that is very simple. You've heard the phrase in the past, it's the economy stupid, right? Ronald Reagan famously asked, during the presidential debates, do you feel like you're better off than you were 4 years ago or not? That's what you should be voting on. And I think more often than not, people vote with their pocketbooks. They vote with how they are personally feeling the economy is treating them. And if it's not treating them well, they don't have a lot of mind space for other types of issues to vote on. So I personally think that most people are going to be voting with how they feel the economy is doing for them when they walk in. There was just a recent survey done by the firm, the company Affirm, that said 3 out of 5 people, when asked, say they think the economy is in recession. And that's because they are struggling. If that doesn't change, I think that's going to be the main reason why people are going to be casting their vote. And generally, you cast it for the party that is not currently in office because they're not doing a great job. At least that's what your wallet's telling you. The election might make a fool out of me. She might win, who knows? But right now, for that main reason, I think Trump is more likely to win. Now, that said, I have for many years expressed the concern that I think in one of the upcoming presidential elections, if the overall macro economy heads in the direction that I think it will continue to head in, I could easily see a true like democratic socialist getting elected into the presidency.
其实这也是我自己很赞同的一个观点哈。那现在呢，很多美国人对于高福利呢是有非常美好的幻想的。那对于人权的定义呢，范围也越来越广。但大多数人从来没有想过这个高福利背后所隐藏的经济代价是什么。那没有什么社会福利是凭空出现的。那这种缺乏基本的经济常识，我个人认为呢是一种教育体系的失败。把追求高福利这个结果平等当做真正的平等，其实是对那些多付出、多承担责任、多生产的这部分人的一种惩罚。这是我说一个我很认同的一种观点哈。那一个社会里面呢，一般有3种人，一种呢是前瞻性的人，还有一种是活在当下的人，还有一种呢是回头看过去的人。那有前瞻性的人呢，愿意延迟满足，那追求未来的这个成果，比如说像创业的人啊，或者投资啊、长期学习，这些人都算是在前瞻性这一栏里哈。那这类人一般会活得很有计划性，对于自己的这个事业要求呢也比较高。活在当下的人呢，就是有多少花多少，很典型的就是月光族。那追求满足此时此刻的需求，这类人。那这类人一般很开放哈，很容易就嗨起来了。回看过去的人一般就比较有文化底蕴，但是呢也相对比较保守，那很难在新的事物上有什么突破，但可能呢会过得非常浪漫。一个社会培养出这3种人的比例呢，就确定了这个社会的发展方向和速度。那美国因为确实没有啥历史哈，所以回头看过去的人呢其实不是特多。但是现在很明显哈，就是出现了越来越多活在当下的人，那越来越少有这种前瞻性的人。这其实对于美国的整体经济发展来说呢，它并不是一个什么好事儿。
More and more people in general, but specifically the younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs, they are really beginning to feel that the social contract has broken. That the American promise that you work hard, you do all the things that you're supposed to do, and you can improve your station in life through hard work and merit. We have so many components of the traditional American dream that just don't seem achievable anymore to folks, to the majority of folks. The ability to afford a house, the ability to send your kids to college, the ability to retire at some point in your life. All of those goals are becoming more and more distant dreams for more and more people here, right? So when the majority of your populace starts losing faith in the social agreement, they kind of feel like they're going to get shafted no matter who becomes president, right? So when you become that discouraged, you basically say, look, I'm gonna get screwed either way, so I may as well vote for the person who's promising to give me free stuff. And so I think there's a real dangerous appeal of the democratic socialist movement, because desperate people want to hear promises. And again, they might say, yeah, it might not work out well for me, but it's not working out well for me no matter who's in the White House. So I may as well go with the person who's going to give me some free stuff in the here and now. But from what we've seen so far of what Kamala has begun to unveil of what her platform could look like, there's a lot of progressive democratic socialism in there. And I'm a little, I've got a little worry here that maybe my timeline was too conservative. And could this be the election that the majority says, hey, you know what? We're going to vote for the person who's going to give us the most free stuff. I don't think we're at that stage yet, but we could be. So I do have that caveat out there that if things continue to get bad going into the election, if she makes some very grandiose promises about, okay, well, I'm going to forgive everybody's debt and I'm going to give everybody, every new home buyer $25,000 and some of the other things that have been suggested, there might be enough people who say, okay, great, let's go for it, right? Now, I think the outcome of those things will be very damaging in the long run. They won't help at all in the long run. They'll actually make the pain that people are feeling today even worse. But the average American isn't that educated in terms of economic issues, financial policies, etc. All they hear is free and say, yes, please, I'd like that now, right?
美国从2战之后呢，就站稳了这个世界首富国的位置哈。那这也让大家认为这种富裕的生活可以一直延续下去。那掌握一个学历可以靠它过一辈子，那这个就有一个大家默认的一个社会契约在了哈。但是现在美国早就不是什么制造业大国了哈。那可是教育体系呢，它依然非常努力的在制造这种劳动型人才，而不是制造创造型人才。这就导致了社会发展的一个需求和劳动力的技能之间的一种错位，也就是说，现在的这个社会运作的这个模式所需要的劳动的技能和教育系统所生产出来的劳动力可能并不那么匹配。
Well, I think it's very true. I mean, to a certain extent, our education system, and I don't want to get too wonky for folks, it's actually based on a Prussian German military model. This is back in the 1800s. It really was created initially to kind of pump out factory workers, right? People who can follow orders well, and okay, you're going to go, and someone's going to tell you how to, use this wrench, and you'll be a good factory worker. Very good point. It's not a great fit for the current times that we're in. The problem is America had a ton of prosperity behind it, in previous generations, particularly after coming out of World War II, right? Where, most of the other major countries were devastated by the war. They had to rebuild. We were providing all the manpower and the materials for that rebuilding. We had a ton of money flooding into this country. We had just recently really figured out how to tap into the vast stores of cheap oil here in the country. And so there was just massive productivity and prosperity boom. A whole bunch of the key elements that were driving that are not as strong today as they were back then. And as I mentioned earlier, as a populace, we kind of began expecting that prosperity rather than realizing we had to continue to earn it as time went on. So now we have kind of a big disconnect where the formula that people are told, which is go to school, get good grades, work hard, and you'll get a great job, and you'll be able to afford all these, luxuries of a middle class lifestyle or better. Increasingly, that formula is not working, and more people are struggling, and more people are starting to get discouraged and, like I said earlier, give up on the social contract. As I'm sure many people who have lived in China have seen from that own country's history, when your populace begins to lose faith in the government's ability to look out for the well-being and prosperity for the populace, nothing good comes out of that. Only bad things come out of that. Civil unrest, stronger top-down control over people and limitations of freedoms. It's just a road you don't want to go down willingly if you can avoid it.
Right, like the UK has been arresting people because they sent some memes that the government don't like. I was shocked by that.
That's a great example of the extremes that things are moving to here, right? And in many cases, those are signs of a government that can't meet the core demand, right? So it's like, hey, I can't give you guys more prosperity, but I still want to stay in power. So what do? Well, I start manufacturing things to keep you distracted, right? So that you're not paying attention to my core failure here. But increasingly, I'm trying to take greater and greater control away from you so that if and when you guys get to a point where you want to rise up, hopefully I have enough controls in place that I can prevent that.
Yeah, I think United States is going to a very dangerous stage, as how I feel like this is not the United States years ago when I first came here. To your point, you're just talking about back then, the money has been flooding into the United States. Now that make me think I've been seeing a lot of foreign money come here into the United States over the past 2-3 years. Because the United States has been keeping the interest rate very high. So it makes the US dollar very strong, and then individuals or institutions overseas, they feel like they need to put their money in the United States to keep their purchasing power. But one of the big element there is the United States, the US dollar needs to stay in power for those people to keep dumping money into the United States to kind of create this false prosperity. The Trump, he's been saying he wants to devalue the dollar, and then at the same time he wants to produce a lot of oil, and so he wants to be the biggest energy production country. Better to sell the energy to the rest of the world than asking energy from outside the United States.
Let's break this discussion into two sections. One is the US dollar relative to other currencies, right? That's the first part of the conversation. The second is the purchasing power of the US dollar relative to things, because they're two very different situations. Let me give you the punchline first. I think it's going to be a long time before the US truly loses its reserve currency status. It's just mathematically very hard for that to happen. You have to have a competing currency come in and really take the place of what the US dollar is doing. It has to have massive scale. If you have the world's reserve currency, mathematically, you have to run a perpetual trade deficit. There are a lot of countries that aren't necessarily prepared to do that. You also have to have the faith of the rest of the world that your currency is going to be better than the US. And the US, with all its problems, you have to remember, there are no saints in this world that we're in here. There's no perfect country that's doing it great, right? It will be very, very hard for the US to lose its dominant share. Could that happen? Sure. Will it happen? probably over some period of time. Will it be in my lifetime? I'm not certain. Could, but there are a lot of people out there that are afraid of the BRICS countries releasing a gold-backed competing currency to the dollar later this year, and then the dollar is going to lose its reserve currency next year, right? I just think that I've talked to enough experts about this that I think those concerns they're just not that realistic. And I wouldn't worry so much about Trump saying that he wants to weaken the dollar a little bit. Look, all currencies go through cycles of being stronger or weaker relative to other currencies. And all countries want to, at times, have a weaker or stronger currency. And generally, they want a weaker currency relative to others because it makes their exports more affordable to the rest of the world, and that drives economic growth inside their countries. Boy, one other thing I forgot to mention, I won't get too wonky, but just to make sure I'm being complete here. When we talk about the US dollar, everybody sort of thinks about the dollars that are inside the US. There's something called the Eurodollar market, which are all the dollars, and more importantly, all the dollar denominated loans that are made outside of the US, but denominated in dollars. So these are dollars that the Federal Reserve has no hand in creating, has no control over. There are foreign banks creating dollar denominated loans to other people in other countries. And that market is massive. It's way bigger than the pool of dollars inside the US. So the reserve current, whatever currency knocks the dollar out to, would have to be adopted on that scale, that it would be the main lubricant for the global economy, and that all the other banks around the world that are currently making dollar-denominated loans would have to start loaning in that new currency. And that new currency would have to be able to absorb all of that volume. So where I'm going with this is the dollar is very heavily entrenched. It's going to be really hard to displace it at some point in time.
这些文字稿我放在这描述栏里面，大家可以点进去查看。加入我邮件列表的话，也会收到我专门为这一部分朋友做的一些非公开的内容哈。关于美元地位这内容呢，我之前的影片里面也提到过很多次哈。那首先呢，欧洲美元或者说是海外的这个美元，现在呢是很大程度上已经脱离了美国自己的控制范围，它更多是成为了一种国际公认的抵押品和交易媒介。关于这个事儿，大家可以回看我跟 Jeff Snyder 做的那一期关于欧洲美元的访谈。另外呢，就是美元它虽然有很多的问题，但是呢敌不过同行的衬托之下，它依然是目前最稳定的法定货币。那所以呢，这也是为什么当阿根廷啊、委内瑞拉呀，或者是斯里兰卡这种国家出现大幅度的通货膨胀，或者是国家机器瘫痪的这个情况呢，那普通人首选的肯定还是把自己的货币换成美元，而不是欧元呐、英镑啊、日元呐，或者是人民币。也就是说，其他国家的这个经济危机反而很有可能会增加美元的需求，也就更稳固了美元的地位。
The second point, which is the dollar versus other things, absolutely, that should be a key concern of anybody who's invested in dollars. It should be a key concern of anybody who's invested in any currency right now, because all currencies pretty much in the world today are what are called fiat currencies, which means they're not backed by anything except your confidence in the government that has issued it, right? But in the olden days, even I'm old enough that I think 2 or 3 weeks after I was born was when President Nixon closed the gold window here in the US. So I was actually still born when the US was on a gold standard. What it does underscore is, for so many of us, what we think of as the dollar or the euro or the yen or yuan or whatever, it's an experiment. The dollar, I'm 53 years old. The dollar is a 53-year-old experiment that we are still figuring out how it's going to play out here, because it's untethered. It's a fiat currency now. We can print as much of it as we want to, right? And so, what has happened to the purchasing power of the dollar since my birth? It's lost 90+% of its purchasing power, right? And that, I think, is going to of all the things that I could tell your viewers to have the greatest confidence in, that's at the top of the list. It's that fiat currencies, as long as we continue to pursue the current policies we're pursuing, both in the US and in the major world countries, the outcome of those policies is going to be that the purchasing power of our currency is going to continue diminishing. So as an investor, what your job is to try to beat inflation. Most investors think, oh, I need to invest and get rich. Honestly, it's a difficult task, first and foremost, which is when you look at the people who are wealthy or truly wealthy, they didn't make their money in the stock market. They made their money in business, right? They found a way to create value such that they ended up getting paid a lot of money for it, right? and then you invest it to protect its purchasing power. Yeah, it's great if you can gain a return above that, and you can, and you should try to strive for that. But your main goal is to invest as a means for defending the wealth that you've created from the ravages of inflation.
Most of people don't understand that stock market is actually not that of a big market compared to how much private equity has hold in the rich people's hand. This is about financial literacy. I think people are being informed in a way that investing is just they'll do day trading and then trade the stock market and try to get rich buying some kind of meme coins. Everybody can just become rich overnight.
It's a toxic mindset. Or just to drill on that, because I think it's a really important point. Wall Street's job is to sell you product. They don't care if it makes you money or not down the road. They just want you to buy it, and they want to collect their fee. And so much of what will happen sometimes on Wall Street is they'll come and they'll tell you, oh, we got this great deal, Joy, you should really get into this thing. And all it is an exit vehicle for the earlier investors, as you were saying, right? So you got to be very eyes wide open here about, the nature of investing here. And something else you said earlier that's really important is, this goes back to my earlier comments about more and more the populace beginning to lose faith in the social contract, especially younger generations, because they're realizing, if I keep doing what I'm doing, there's no way I'm ever buying a house, like affording a house, right? They're stretching for yield. So what they're doing is they're looking around and they're saying, okay, look, I think the only way I'm going to ever be able to meet my financial dreams is basically getting a winning lottery ticket. So yeah, let me take a gamble on that meme coin, right? Or let me jump into GameStop, right? Or whatever, right? And so we have been doing an incredibly damaging job, I think, of teaching younger generations what they think is investing, but what's really just rampant speculation, right? It's gambling. And what happens is by definition, the vast majority of them get burned and lose. And then they are losing money they can't afford to be putting at risk. So they're just setting themselves far back. But also B, they're then giving up on the markets. They're giving up on investing. Like, I tried investing, I got totally burned. I'm not going to deal with that, right? And it's like, no. You weren't investing, you were speculating. If you actually were using the tenets of investing to protect and build your wealth over time, you'd actually be in really good shape in 10, 20, 30 years, right? But these people are giving up on it because they got burned and they just figure, well, investing's, it's a casino. And it's like, well, yeah, the whole thing isn't a casino. It's just the parts that you were playing. Yeah.
投资的从来都不是一多快好省的事儿，开个股票账户，买几只蓝筹股，那学一些小技巧，当个日交易员，它并不能帮助大多数人理解经济原理，然后长久的去积累自己的财富。而在股市里面长久赚到钱的人呢，他靠的从来都不是运气。那我自己理解呢，一直都是靠运气赚来的钱，一定会靠实力给赔回去。普通二级市场的参与者呢，跟 Ray Dalio 最大的区别呢，是对经济和社会体系的理解，还有信息渠道。那精算团队、融资能力、社会关系，最后才是资金量。那这也是我想跟大家传递的一个信息哈，就是投资呢，它是一个专业领域，需要不断的学习、尝试、打磨自己的这个投资的方式和思维。那它是一个长期积累的过程哈，里面呢有犯错的时候，也有成功的时候，这些都是不可避免的。That's the reason why you and me we built YouTube channel just to spread the real knowledge and real information, especially the real mindset.
Exactly. Now, I know you interviewed Lance Roberts. I have Lance on my channel every week. His firm's one of the financial advisory firms that Thoughtful Money partners with. And Lance always uses the analogy of gardening. And I think gardening actually is a really good analogy in a whole bunch of ways. But like, if you're gardening, right? You don't plant a watermelon seed and then walk out the next day expecting to find a massive watermelon there, right?
Exactly.
Right? You have to do a lot of hard work over a very prolonged period of time. And you're going to, some of the things you plant they're not going to grow. Some of your plants are going to do great. Some of your plants are going to look like they're doing great. And then there's going to be a hailstorm and it's going to damage them, or, early frost or whatever, right? So it's a long, prolonged process, right? And even with gardening, like, if you've ever grown your own food, you've learned a like it's easy to kill things. It takes me a while to learn how to actually grow them.
Did you post on Twitter about your garden or stuff?
Yeah, I do a little background, but yeah, my corn just came in and I was having some fresh corn, which was great. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you looked at my Twitter. But what you learn by learning how to grow things is you learn that, oh my gosh, if I had to depend on just myself and my ability to grow food to meet all of my calorie needs, oh my gosh, I'd starve right away. Right? It takes you a long time of learning and a long time of increasing your garden size until you ever get to the point where you have like enough that you could be feeding all of yourself and all of your family. I mean, you really need a lot of acres to do that. It's kind of like our thing about like, hey, it's not like you're going to put a little money in and then be able to retire tomorrow. It's you're going to be on this long, prolonged process of just putting more money away over time. It's going to, if you're doing it right, it's going to keep accreting, and eventually, decades down the road, you should have kept pace with inflation, and B, if you've been able to beat the market, a number of those years, you'll have a lot of excess, and then that'll be the equivalent of having a garden that provides all the calories for you and your family. But it takes time and hard work, and there's risk in there. You got to manage. It's not to your point, a get rich quick thing. There's no shortcuts.
我经常被问到的一个问题呢，就是我们要怎么样去整理所吸收的信息，建立自己对于信息分辨的一个方式。那最后呢，得到一个能够符合自己投资需求的一个结论。如果大家关注过 Thoughtful Money 的话呢，大家知道 Adam 他采访了非常多全球顶尖的业内人士啊和学者，得到的资讯肯定是要比普通人多得多的，也更不容易去筛选，因为每个被采访的人所表达的结论都有一套非常严谨和专业的思考。那 Adam 对于信息的分辨方式呢，就是
So on my channel, Thoughtful Money, it's not, hey, here's Adam and he's interviewing people and he's telling you, what the world is. I do my own synthesis of what people tell me, and I'll answer your question in a minute, Joy, of what I think. But I don't see, it's not my job to tell people what reality is. What my job is to bring the expert on and help the expert like tell their full story and put the information out there for the viewer, so the viewer can determine what makes sense to them, what doesn't, which parts of that expert's perspective do they want to take with them and which parts do they not want to. So I'm not here to tell anybody that I know everything. But to the spirit of your question, I talk to a lot of smart people. What I find endlessly fascinating is that you can get really smart people looking at the exact same data and coming up with different conclusions to it. Right. And that makes it really challenging as a curious-minded, critically thinking investor to say, well, gosh, which one do I pick? Right. So I think I would start by saying, as an investor, you always want to start with the time-honored principles of investing in wealth building, right? Because they've worked for so long that even if you make some specific calls that go wrong, in general, the principles will keep you on the track of going right. So things like diversification, right? It's not a bad idea to say, hey, I think these things are going to happen. And so you allocate your portfolio a healthy amount towards those outcomes. But then you really need to ask yourself, hey, I need to have some defense in here in case I'm wrong, right? In case my primary thesis doesn't. So two guys have two different opinions. If I like guy number one, I shouldn't put 100% of my portfolio on what he thinks is going to happen. I should put at least some on what the other guy says, just in case he turns out to be right, right? So things like diversification, super important. Things like dollar cost averaging, things like position sizing. You don't want to have any one position be so large that if it were to go catastrophically wrong, it would bring your entire portfolio down with you. You want to be doing portfolio rebalancing, which is if you have your target position sizes for what you have in your portfolio, if one starts doing exceptionally well, you want to start trimming that back and taking those gains, because you only actualize a gain when you sell the stock, right? If the stock goes up 1,000%, but then by the time you sell it, it's gone down 1,000%, you've missed your opportunity, right? So there are all these basic tenets of wealth building that I think you just want to start with first and foremost.
也就是说呢，不管你同意哪一位专业人士的意见，都不要把鸡蛋放在同一个篮子里面，把自己的资产分配在不同的这个领域，那甚至说是对立的领域，形成一种风险对冲的效果。那这样的话呢，哪怕是一个领域的资产出现了问题，另外一个领域的资产走势呢，可能正相反。那我给大家举一个例子哈，上一期我讲了一下商业地产里面一级市场从2020年到2024年的情况，那其中呢就提到了一个产品叫做 interest rate cap， 是一种一段时间之内可以给浮动利率封顶的这么一个类似于保险类的产品。那这个保险产品在2024年的时候呢，那价格差不多是2021年的10倍。如果当时2021年的时候，地产投资公司考虑到了利率在保险期结束之后还是会继续上涨的这种可能性的话呢，那其实当时在2021年的时候就可以去买一个 swap， 那也就是一种互换合约。那合约内容如果是这个利率在一段时间内会上涨的话呢，不过我确实是没有2021年的时候如果买这个 swap 到底要花多少钱哈，但是我相信不会很高，应该就是跟类似条例的这个利率保险差别不太大。那这样的话呢，哪怕是2023年和2024年的时候利率保险它失效了，有这么一个互换合约在，那地产投资公司呢还可以从这个互换合约里面获得收益。那这个就是分散资产和风险能够给投资人带来的好处。
I'll tell you kind of how I bring people on the channel and how I kind of look at resolving their differences. What I try to do is I try to listen really attentively to my audience and see what are the questions that they want answered most right now. So, for example, a lot of people saying, hey, I want more content explaining the yen carry trade, right? Because the unwind of the yen carry trade was a trigger for why we had that meltdown in the market. So the audience will tell you, hey, these are the issues that we're really trying to think through as viewers. And so I go around and I start trying to find, okay, who are good experts on this topic? Then I bring them on, we listen to what they have to say. In the areas where they differ, again, my job when I interview each person is just to get their story as clearly on the table as I can. Make sure they say, yep, you're telling my story the right way. Great. And I let the audience, listen and reflect and make up their own mind.
而对于目前我们所处的这个经济周期呢， Adam 并不是非常乐观哈。
So when I combine all the input that I'm getting from all the folks that I interview, here's kind of the general takeaway that I have. The majority of them are pretty concerned about where the global economy is headed. They think that it is in slowdown mode generally. Certainly the US market is starting to slow down, and that's really been the lead horse that's been pulling the rest of the global economy behind it for the past couple of years. Coming into this year, everybody was hoping that China was finally going to start being a real tailwind to economic growth, and it hasn't happened, right? And China's having continued issues there, and it's having to go back to stimulus, and it's announced that it may have trouble hitting its 5% GDP growth goals, which are crazy because, Joy, I'm sure you remember like I do, a few years ago, 5% GDP growth just seemed unimaginably low for China, given the numbers that they were putting out, right? Now, we can argue how trustworthy are the Chinese numbers, but the fact that the Chinese officials themselves are lowering it and saying they might have trouble hitting it is like, we've never heard that type of stuff before. And, it's not a huge surprise, Joy, right? I mean, we pumped the global economy full of an unimaginable amount of stimulus during the COVID era, right? I mean, if in 2019, I had told you however many tens of trillions were going to be flooded into the global economy over the next couple of years, you would not have believed me. You would have said, absolutely not. And you probably would have said, if they do that, like the dollar is going to be toilet paper. There's just all these things that have happened that we just could have never believed, right? So all that's still rippling through the system, but it is waning, right? And so the patient has been, artificially juiced with stimulus, but it's now kind of beginning to slow down. And, the question is it going to go unconscious or not, right? I don't think we're at that level of danger just yet. But one of the things I talk about on my channel is that monetary policy and fiscal policy too, but it acts with a lag effect, so that when you pull a lever, it takes, like, especially monetary policy, when the Fed decides, we're going to change the interest rate, right? And it pulls that lever, it takes anywhere from a couple quarters to over a year for that to be fully experienced inside the economy itself, out in the real world. There's a long delay factor to begin with. Now, we did a ton of stimulus during COVID, like I mentioned, but we're continuing to do stimulus, as are many other countries. So on the fiscal side now, the US is still, we got what, a $2+ trillion deficit? We're still throwing money out there month after month. And so that has been slowing the delay even further, right? To the point where people have started saying, oh, yeah, the Fed raised interest rates from near zero to 5+%. We're all worried, but everything's still holding together. So you know what? I don't think the lag effect applies this time. In fact, I think we're going to have a soft landing, or now there's the whole no landing, right, narrative, right? And so people change their behavior and they get overconfident, and that tends to happen right at the time when the lag effect starts arriving in earnest. And I think that's what we're beginning to see now. So, we're seeing households really beginning to struggle here in the States. Our GDP is 70% consumer spending, right? So as the consumer pocketbook goes, so goes the economy. We're starting to see the unemployment rate really begin to creep up here. And we have tons and tons of indicators that have already been in recessionary levels for, in some cases, so long that we've become numb to them, like the inverted yield curves, right? So I think we are likely at the part of the story now where the lag effect is really beginning to show up. We've finished with the majority of the stimulus that we've done. So even the remaining stimulus we're doing is now smaller than the impact of the strength of the lag effect that's arriving. And so, I think barring some sort of catalyst that returns the US and other parts of the global economy back to some kind of robust growth, the danger here is that we tip into recession at some point over the next 12 months. And I might actually take the under on that one, meaning think it'll happen sooner. In fact, I think parts of the economy are probably already in a recession right now.
那对于普通人来说，我们应该从哪里开始建立我们自己的这个财务体系呢？
I think what you want to create is, again, this diversified approach, right? Where you want to have, and let me be really simplistic for a minute. There's 3 muscles you really want to work on developing, right? There's your earning muscle, right? How can I generate income? And for most people, a business or a highly marketable skill set is going to do that, right? So, ask yourself, what kind of high earning business can I create, or businesses have multiple streams of income, which is even better. Or what skill can I develop that the market's going to pay me a ton of money for, right? Brain surgeon, right? As an extreme example, right? That's your first one. That's income, your income muscle. Your second is your savings muscle, right? Because a lot of people who are high earners, they're high spenders, right? They don't have a lot of financial literacy. Hey, it's fun. Money's to be enjoyed. I'm going to have the big house.
For example, a lot of famous athletes.
Yeah, it happens to athletes all the time, right? So what you want to do is, I don't know if you've ever talked about the book, The Millionaire Next Door, with your viewers.
No.
It's a great book. There's a lot of books out there that are, hey, follow this recipe and you'll get rich. The Millionaire Next Door was written back in the late 90s by 2 PhDs. And what they did is they just surveyed, they talked to thousands of millionaires. So they say, look, we don't have a secret recipe. We're just going to tell you what all these millionaires have in common, right? And the book was really striking because it dispelled a lot of conventional thoughts about millionaires. People thought, oh, most millionaires inherited their wealth and they live in mansions and eat caviar all the time. And actually, kind of your average millionaire, and this was written back in the late 90s when $1 million was worth a lot more than it is now. They blue collar people. They live in a middle class neighborhood. In fact, you wouldn't be able to tell by their house that they were richer than their neighbors. Most of them never would buy a car new. This might be like the guy who owns like 7 dry cleaners, right? So that actually is much more your average millionaire. They're self-made. They've done it through largely, usually some sort of unsexy, field, but they've been able through, hard work and smarts to build a nice empire. But the number one factor they all have in common is frugality. So back to your savings muscle, you want to challenge yourself. And I would say people should save a minimum of 20% of what they take home in a month and really should strive for 30, right? And then once you've hit 30, your goal as time goes on is to say, how high can I get this? All right, I'm at 30. can I do 40? Can I do 50? Right? So you want to earn as much as you can, save as much of that as you can. And then the third is the investing muscle, which we're talking about here, right? Your income muscle is great because it's building you income, and hopefully it's giving you some sort of exit multiple, right? That like at some point in the future, if I build this business, yes, it's paying me X amount every year, but at some point I could sell that payment stream to somebody for a big check. It's a little bit harder if you're like a surgeon, but you could build a practice, a surgical practice, where there are ways for you to capitalize off of that. It's harder if you're an employee who works for a paycheck. But what's interesting is once you understand the different ways in which you can earn income, right? Being a business owner, being an investor, being a self-employed specialist, or just being a regular employee, it kind of helps you make a decision about, hey, do I want to keep doing what I'm doing, or do I want to try to get into one of those other quadrants, right? Maybe I'm an employee today, but I would aspire to be a business owner. Yeah. So on the investing side, like I said, your job there, first and foremost, is to beat inflation, and then try to see if you can get a consistent return above that over time. But there, I think, you're using diversification to your standpoint. So yes, you want to be invested in stocks. We've been talking most of the time about stocks, but there's a whole world of credit and fixed income investing, which is honestly, if you know how to invest in that space, it's safer.
Right. I heard a billionaire saying, like, if I will start all over again, the first thing I will invest in is note. It's not the treasury note, it's the note that's on the debt.
Yep.
The mortgage, things that get paid back every month. Probably the most stable thing that a new investor can invest in, which is not stock, but is something that can give you steady cash flow.
So absolutely. And look, I'm just going to give the punchline of kind of what I do at Thoughtful Money is I try to bring on experts to help explain this to people, right? To educate you that it exists, direct you to people who can teach you more on it. So like this fellow, Stephen Bavaria, if folks want to learn more about him, they can go to his website and read all about the income. They can buy his Income Factory book. And I think everybody should educate ourselves. Now, the question is, okay, so what am I going to do with this information, right? Am I going to use it to change my portfolio allocation? There are definitely people who will. And if you're an experienced do-it-yourself investor and have the experience and skills, great. Get smarter like this and make your decision-making better. But for the vast majority of people, Joy, they have real lives, right? They've got jobs that they've got to work at. They've got families that they've got to attend to. Taking action part becomes very stressful because they know they need to do it, but they don't necessarily feel like they've got the skills, the expertise, or the time or the desire. And that's where I say, hey, that's where you should find a good professional financial advisor who can be your financial quarterback here and run all this stuff for you. And what you should do, and the reason why I'm hammering so hard at this is because depending upon which camp you're in, it's a very different focus. If I'm going to be the DIY guy, great. What I should be looking at is what's the next best investment for me to put in my portfolio? How much, at what price should I buy it at? What am I going to sell to make room for it if I need to do that? All that stuff, right? You're in portfolio management math mode, right? If you're one of the many regular people in the other camp, your question should be, okay, how do I find the right professional to partner with, to leverage their expertise? And again, there's different professionals out there, and some might have approaches that don't work for you. So how do I help myself find a good one, and how do I help that person be successful? And ways to do that are like getting as clear as possible with like, what are my financial goals? Like, yes, we'd all love to, have a super yacht and live in Monaco. But realistically, what is success for you? Is it, I want to be able to retire with this much money by this age. I want to be able to put these two kids through colleges that cost X money. So like have all that stuff as defined as well as possible, because the more specificity you can give a good professional, they can customize a plan that's best suited to your needs. And a big thing about being a good investor is getting your goals right. Because if you get your goal right, like I said, historically, the stock market has returned 7+% a year, right? I think it could return less going forward over the next decade. If I give goals that say, hey, I'm going to need a 12% annual return, a good advisor is going to say, look, I think you need to ratchet your goals down because you're going to take on too much risk, right? For every additional percentage point of risk, of return that you're asking for above, of any kind of return, the risk jumps exponentially. right? Yeah, there are products out there that could give you a 12% return on average, but the risk of them having a catastrophic loss in there gets a lot higher. Most people do is just say, no, give me the highest return you can. I want to get the most money possible, right? And they end up stretching for return at a risk degree that they have no business being in, especially as you get older. Like right now, America's seniors have the highest degree of equity risk exposure they've ever had, which is criminal. Because if we get a substantial market repricing here, there's a ton of people that are either not going to be able to afford to retire, or there's going to be a lot of, and probably not or, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have to unretire. They thought they were retired, but all of a sudden the market corrected by 20+%, and they're realizing, hey, wait a minute, I can't make it anymore. I have to go back to work, even though I'm 80.
那我们来总结一下这一期的内容哈。我们一开始呢就提到了即将到来的这个美国大选，那似乎现在呢我们面对的这个情况呢非常焦灼，而且这个不光是两党之间一个简单的政策选择的问题哈，而是两种非常不同的这个价值观的一次交锋。那由此呢我们可以感受到，之所以美国现在面临这种处境，那少不了教育系统和社会经济运作这个体系之间出现的这个错位。那教育体系一直在延续二战之后建立的一种工业时代的社会契约哈，也就是去上学拿一学历找份工作，然后一直拿着工资交社保，退休以后再领退休金。那现在我们切身的体会就是，随着这个全球化进程的加速呢，那美国已经不是之前的那个工业大国了，而且呢，大家已经习惯了全球化带来的这个低价的商品和服务，这就让从工业时代的教育体系里面生产出的这个社会劳动力在市场上的竞争力变得越来越低。过去100年以来公认的这个社会契约，在近20年之内呢，逐渐的失效。对社会契约的失望呢，也让很多人做出那既然找工作这么难，那我投票的时候谁能给我免费的东西，我就选谁的这么一种思路。这也就是为什么美国出现了非常多的这个社会主义的思潮和传统资本主义价值观之间的这个尖锐的矛盾。那不过话说回来哈，虽然美国现在有很多的问题，但并不代表美元的地位很快就会被取代。那还是那句话，全靠同行衬托。那其他国家的货币啊、经济啊，还有国防的状况，其实都不如美国。但是从美国国内来看的话呢，美元在过去的几十年之内购买力下降，也让现在的年轻人一代呢感到财务上非常的无力，感觉挣的钱永远不够花的。很多人觉得自己可能这一辈子都上不了财富自由这趟车了哈。但是在等着这个政府撒钱和追赶财富自由的公交车之间呢，其实还有一个非常危险的地带哈，就是把投机当做投资，与其静下心去接触这个经济和社会的原理，了解自己的需求，理性分析利弊，把投资当做一门专业领域去了解，那反而呢是玩上心跳了。那也许我们可以看得到呢，有很多人在投机领域大杀四方，但是我相信绝大多数人的命运会跟那歌词写的是一样的。我以为我会暴富，但是我没有。不追求从运气里面得来的财富，从资产类别、投资渠道和时间维度上面分散风险，才是最适合普通人的投资理念。那想办法扩大自己的资产量，对冲资产配置里面的风险，不要迷信某一个公司或者某一类资产类别。外加上 Adam 提到的，在赚钱、省钱和投资这技能上不断打磨自己，这样我们才能更长久的、稳定的实现自己的财务目标。虽然说这些投资原理呢非常老生常谈，而且在如今这种以多快好省为目标的投机浪潮之下呢，它显得非常不性感。但是也就是这些不性感的思维架构，往往才是能够帮助我们多次穿越经济周期的核心实力。好，那这一期呢，咱们就先说这么多。英语好的朋友们呢，去关注一下 Adam 的这个 Thoughtful Money， 我相信大家一定不会失望的。哎，当然那什么，走之前先订阅一下我频道哈。